The silence in the penthouse was not a peaceful thing. It was a predator. It was a coiled snake made of 80 floors of glass and steel, and at its heart was the wreckage of an $800 million deal. Julian Thorne stood before the panoramic window, but he did not see the sprawling city below. He saw the ghost of a handshake. He saw the tight, unreadable face of Kenji Tanaka as he had delivered the final, fatal bow. The air, usually conditioned to a precise 68 degrees, felt thick and hot. It smelled of failure. It smelled of spilled scotch and the faint, acrid tang of panic sweating from the pores of the men in the room. His men. The best men money could buy. He turned from the window, his movements sharp, clipped. His gaze swept over them. There was David Chen, the lead negotiator, his usually perfect silk tie now askew, his face pale. There was the legal team, a trio of sharks who now looked like beached minnows, gasping at the expensive air. And there was Marcus Vance, his vice president of acquisitions, whose face was a mask of furious disbelief. Well. Julian's voice was dangerously quiet. It was a sound that made his board of directors flinch. It was the calm before a storm that could level careers. I don't understand, Chen stammered, rubbing his temples. We gave him everything. The price, the terms, the profit share, he had it all. He had it all, and he walked, Julian stated. It wasn't a question. It was the final, ugly fact of the matter. He walked out of an $800 million deal like he was leaving a coffee shop because the barista got his order wrong. Why? No one spoke. The silence returned, heavier this time, pressing down on them all. The crystal glasses on the bar seemed to hum with the tension. The abstract art on the walls, usually a source of pride for Julian, now seemed to mock him with its chaotic, meaningless shapes. The translators. Julian's eyes found the two specialists huddled near the door, looking as if they wished the floor would swallow them. Did we miss something? A nuance. A cultural misstep. The senior translator, a man with decades of experience and a fee that could fund a small startup, cleared his throat. Mr. Thorne, we went over the transcripts. Every word was precise. The language was respectful, formal, standard. There was no linguistic cause for this. Mr. Tanaka was simply inscrutable. Inscrutable. Julian hated that word. It was a word for failures. It was a word people used when they had no answers. He had paid them for answers, not for $5 words that meant I don't know. So, a man is about to sign the most lucrative hospitality deal of the decade, Julian began, his voice dropping another lethal octave, and in the final hour, he just changes his mind. For no reason. He torpedoes months of work, flies 12 hours back to Tokyo, and blows up a partnership that would define his legacy, because he felt inscrutable today. He picked up a heavy crystal tumbler. The remaining scotch swirled, a golden eddy in a glass prison. The men tensed. They expected him to throw it. To shatter it against the wall in a blaze of fury that would, at least, break the tension. He didn't yell. He didn't throw the glass. He placed it down on the polished mahogany bar with a quiet, terrifying click. Find out why, he whispered, and the whisper was worse than any shout. His jet doesn't leave for 3 hours. I want an answer before it's in the air. I don't care how you get it. Call your contacts. Bribe his staff. Read the damn tea leaves. Just find out. Now get out of my sight. All of you. They scrambled, a flurry of expensive suits and panicked apologies, leaving Julian alone in the silent, predatory penthouse. He was alone with the ghost of the deal, the smell of failure, and the sickening, vertiginous feeling of a man standing on the edge of a cliff he hadn't seen until the ground crumbled beneath his feet. He was powerful. He was wealthy. He was a king in this glass tower. And he was utterly, completely helpless. Down in the basement, in a small, windowless break room that smelled of industrial ammonia and damp wool, Ilara sat on a cracked vinyl chair. The ache in her back was a familiar companion, a low, steady thrum that radiated from her spine to her shoulders. She was counting. $212. That's what she had left after rent. Her brother Leo's medication cost $350 a month. The specialist visit he needed, the one the doctor said couldn't wait, was $2,000. A number so astronomical it felt like a joke. A cruel, bitter punchline. Her hands, raw and chapped from the bleach and the endless scrubbing, rested on her knees. The cuticles were red, inflamed. She looked at them, not with self-pity, but with a kind of detached weariness. They were the hands of a ghost. The hands of someone who moved through the world unseen, erasing the messes of the powerful, leaving behind nothing but a sterile shine and the faint scent of lemon polish. Ilara was a cleaner. She worked for the agency that serviced Thorn Tower, the gleaming monument to Julian Thorne's ambition. She cleaned the executive floors. The penthouse suite. She had polished the very bar where he had just placed his glass. She had dusted the frame of the painting that mocked him. She had vacuumed the rug where his experts had stood and failed. She was invisible. A function, not a person. A pair of hands, a rolling cart, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on marble. When the men in their sharp suits and sharper anxieties had rushed out of the penthouse, they had not seen her. They had walked around her, their eyes focused on their phones, their minds on their impending doom, parting around her like water around a stone. She was just part of the scenery. A fixture. Her shift was almost over. Another 12 hours of erasing smudges, emptying bins, and breathing in the quiet desperation of other people's lives. She pulled a small, worn book from her pocket. It was a collection of Japanese poetry. The cover was soft, creased from years of being carried. She had taught herself. First from discarded magazines she found in the recycling bins of a university library where she used to clean. Then from books, cheap paperbacks bought with spare change. Then online tutorials watched on her cracked phone screen during her lunch breaks. It wasn't a hobby. It was an escape. An entire world built of intricate characters and elegant grammar, a world far from the smell of bleach and the gnawing worry over Leo. She could read hiragana, katakana, and over 2,000 kanji. She could speak it, her accent honed by hours of mimicking news anchors from subtitled videos. She was more fluent than she let on to anyone. It was her secret, a small, beautiful garden she tended in the back of her mind. The door to the break room swung open and Mrs. Albright, the head of housekeeping, bustled in. She was a woman who seemed to be held together by starch and a deep, abiding sense of duty. She'd worked in the building for 30 years. She saw everything. "Tough day upstairs, Ilara," she said, her voice a low rumble. She didn't ask. She stated. Mrs. Albright didn't believe in gossip, only in observable fact. "The air is so thick you could cut it with a butter knife." "They seemed upset, ma'am," Ilara said, her own voice quiet, soft. The voice of someone used to not being heard. Mrs. Albright looked at the poetry book in Ilara's lap. "Still at it, I see," a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "One day, all those little squiggles will be more useful than a mop and bucket." Ilara just smiled faintly and tucked the book away. For her, the squiggles were the point. They weren't for being useful. They were for being beautiful. They were for her. Her final task of the night was the penthouse conference room. The scene of the crime. She pushed her cart through the silent, opulent halls. The plush carpet absorbed the sound of her wheels, reinforcing her sense of invisibility. The room was a mess. Not a dirty mess, but a mess of tension and failure. Half-empty water glasses sweating onto polished wood. A discarded notepad covered in frantic, meaningless doodles. A single, high-tech tablet left on the table, its screen dark. She worked methodically, her movements economical, practiced. She gathered the glasses, wiped the table, her cloth moving in long, smooth strokes. Her mind was on the numbers. 212. 2,000. The gap between them was a canyon. As she emptied a wastebasket into her rolling bin, a small piece of paper fluttered out. It was different from the glossy presentation printouts. It was thicker, a piece of personal stationery, embossed with a subtle chrysanthemum crest. There was a single line of hurried, elegant script on it. Kanji. She almost threw it away. It was just trash. But her eyes caught the characters. Her mind translated them automatically, a reflex she couldn't stop. Niwa no tamashii wa yurinai. The soul of the garden is not for sale. It was a line from a classical poem. A famous one, about honor and heritage. She had read it dozens of times in her little book. To see it here, scrawled on a piece of stationery in this room of cold glass and colder money, was jarring. It was like finding a wildflower growing through a crack in the pavement. She looked at the paper. It was from Mr. Tanaka's personal notepad. This was the thought he had as the deal collapsed. This was the key. But what did it mean? She remembered the presentation materials she had seen while cleaning earlier in the week. The architectural renderings for the Thorn Golden Sands Okinawa Resort, a sprawling complex of pools, restaurants, and luxury suites. She remembered one page in particular. An aerial view showing the proposed new golf course extension. It was a beautiful green expanse, right on the coast. And in the middle of it, a small, circled area marked for clearing and leveling. It looked like nothing. Just a patch of overgrown trees and rocks on the digital map. A garden. A sudden, shocking clarity hit her. It was so clear, so simple, it was like a light flicking on in a dark room. The experts, with their financial models and legal jargon, were looking at the deal. Mr. Tanaka was looking at the land. She pocketed the small piece of paper. It felt warm in her hand. It felt heavy. Heavy with the weight of $800 million and the soul of a garden. She finished her work, her mind racing. The building was quiet now. The executives were gone. The experts were off chasing their tails. She was just a cleaner, pushing her cart towards the service elevator, her shoes squeaking softly on the marble floor. But for the first time, she wasn't thinking about the rent. She wasn't thinking about the ache in her back. She was thinking about a poem. And a garden. And the vast, catastrophic space between what was said and what was heard. The elevator ride down to the basement was a descent into her own world. The polished gleam of the executive floors gave way to the utilitarian gray of the service levels. The air changed, the scent of expensive cologne and ambition replaced by the smell of hot pipes and cleaning fluid. She clocked out, the mechanical punch of the time clock a dull thud in the quiet. She changed out of her uniform, the gray smock feeling like a second skin she was shedding. Dressed in her own worn jeans and a thin sweater, she felt even more anonymous, if that were possible. On her way out, she passed the small office Mrs. Albright used. The light was still on. The older woman was hunched over a ledger, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up as Elara hesitated in the doorway. "Something on your mind, child?" Mrs. Albright's eyes were sharp. They missed nothing. Elara held up the small, creased piece of paper. "I found this." Mrs. Albright took it, her calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. She squinted at the Japanese characters. To her, they were just elegant, alien marks. "And what is it?" "It's a line from a poem," Elara said softly. "It says, 'The soul of the garden is not for sale.'" Mrs. Albright looked from the paper to Elara's face. She saw the light in the younger woman's eyes. The flicker of something more than exhaustion. She had seen that look before, in young executives on their way up, never in a member of her cleaning staff. This was in the conference room. "Yes, ma'am." "Mr. Tanaka's." Mrs. Albright handed the paper back. She didn't need to understand the words to understand their importance. She understood the context. She understood the chaos upstairs and the quiet intensity of the young woman standing before her. "They're all running around like chickens with their heads cut off up there," Mrs. Albright said, her voice dry. "Paid a fortune to be smart, and they can't see what's right in front of their faces." She looked pointedly at Elara. "Some people see dirt. You, child, you seem to see the writing in the dust." Elara didn't know what to say. She just nodded, the weight of the paper in her pocket seeming to grow with each passing second. She said her goodbyes and headed for the exit, the cold night air a welcome shock after the recycled atmosphere of the tower. The bus ride home was a blur. The usual cacophony of the city, the sirens, the traffic, the shouting, faded into a distant hum. Her mind was a whirlwind. A garden. The soul of a garden. She pulled out her phone, the cracked screen glowing in the dim light of the bus. She ignored the low battery warning and typed, "Thorn Golden Sands Okinawa," into the search bar. She scrolled past the glossy press releases and the fawning business articles. She was looking for something else. She added "land survey" and "historical maps" to her search, using the Japanese terms she knew. And there it was. buried in a local Okinawan Historical Society's online archive. A low-resolution scan of an old property map. The land was known for centuries as Ryujin's Rest, and right where the Thorn Tower plans had a circle marked leveling, the old map showed a small, intricate symbol. The symbol for a Kairensui. A Zen garden. Not just any garden, but one mythologized to have been laid out by a 17th-century master, a place of spiritual significance tied to the local sea deity. It wasn't a patch of weeds. It was the equivalent of a cathedral. And Julian Thorne's team had planned to bulldoze it for a golf course extension. The bus lurched to a stop. Her stop. But Ilara didn't move. She just stared at the screen, the pieces locking into place with a horrifying, final click. This wasn't a business misunderstanding. This was a desecration. An insult so profound, so deeply rooted in history and honor, that no amount of money could ever fix it. Mr. Tanaka hadn't just walked away from a deal. He had fled from an act of barbarism. She finally got off the bus and walked the few blocks to her small apartment building. The worry about Leo, about the rent, came rushing back, but it was different now. It was a dull ache beneath a sharper, more urgent anxiety. She held the key. She, the invisible cleaner, held the $800 million key. What could she do? Tell someone. Who? The security guard at the front desk who barely grunted at her. The agency supervisor who saw her as a number on a timesheet. Walk back into that tower and try to explain poetry and history to men who only understood profit and loss. The thought was absurd. They would laugh at her. Or worse, they would have her fired for taking a piece of trash from a bin. She was nothing to them. Less than nothing. She unlocked the door to her tiny apartment. It was clean, sparse. A mattress on the floor, a small table with 2 chairs, and books. Books everywhere. Stacked on the floor, on the windowsill, crammed into a small bookshelf. Her secret garden made manifest. She saw the blinking light on her answering machine. A message from Leo's doctor's office. A courtesy call to remind her of the outstanding bill. The canyon between $200 and $2,000 yawned before her, vast and dark. She sat on the edge of her mattress, the city lights filtering through her window, and felt a quiet desperation settle over her. She had the answer. She held a truth worth a fortune. And it was utterly, completely useless. The next morning, the desperation had curdled into a hard knot in her stomach. She hadn't slept. She had spent the night staring at the ceiling, the kanji characters for garden and soul burning behind her eyelids. The world of Julian Thorne was a distant planet, a place of immense gravity and power she could only observe from afar. Her world was this small room, the looming medical bills, and the quiet fear of failing her brother. She had to go to work. The rent wouldn't pay itself. The routine was a comfort, a familiar set of actions that didn't require thought. Uniform. Time clock. Cart. The squeak of her shoes on the polished floor. But today, the tower felt different. The tension from the penthouse had seeped down through the floors, infecting the entire building. There was a frantic energy in the air. People moved faster, their voices were sharper. The failure was palpable. Julian Thorne had not slept either. He had spent the night in his penthouse, fueled by black coffee and cold fury. His experts had come back to him with nothing. Worse than nothing. They had theories. The market was spooked. Tanaka had a secret, more lucrative offer from a competitor. He was posturing for a better price. Each theory was more baseless than the last, a desperate attempt to apply Western logic to a situation that defied it. Julian had dismissed them all before dawn. He was now pacing his office, a caged lion 38 floors above the ground. His world was built on control, on understanding the variables and manipulating them to his advantage. This was chaos. This was a variable he couldn't even name. The deadline was past. Tanaka's jet was scheduled to leave in less than an hour. He had lost. The finality of it was a bitter pill. Ilara was cleaning the executive washroom, the one just outside Julian's private office. It was all marble and chrome, a temple of corporate hygiene. She could hear the muffled sounds from the office. A clipped, angry phone call. The heavy tread of pacing feet. She knew she had to do something. The thought was terrifying. It went against every instinct she had honed over years of survival. Keep your head down. Stay invisible. Don't make trouble. But the image of Leo's pale face, the sound of the doctor's patient but firm voice on the answering machine, that was a stronger instinct. She thought about walking up to the door and knocking. What would she say? "Excuse me, Mr. Thorne, I'm the cleaning lady, and I know you're about to lose nearly $1 billion because you don't understand 17th century Japanese landscape poetry." They would call security. They might even call for a psychiatric evaluation. There had to be a smarter way. A channel. She thought of Marcus Vance. The vice president. He was important. He was in the room. He was Julian Thorne's right hand. If she could just get a message to him, he could relay it. He would understand the urgency. It was a foolish hope, born of desperation, but it was the only one she had. She finished the washroom, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She timed it perfectly. As she wheeled her cart out, she saw Marcus Vance striding down the hallway, his face a thundercloud. He was barking into his phone, something about chartering a helicopter. This was her chance. Her only chance. She took a deep breath, the smell of bleach filling her lungs, and pushed her cart forward, positioning herself in his path. It was a subtle, clumsy move. "Excuse me," he snapped, not even looking at her, trying to sidestep. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice barely a whisper. It came out thin, reedy. He stopped. He actually stopped and looked at her. His eyes, cold and blue, swept over her, taking in the gray uniform, the chapped hands, the worn-out shoes. It wasn't a look of recognition. It was a look of annoyance, of disbelief that a piece of the furniture had dared to speak. "What?" he said. The single word was laced with contempt. "I have information," she began, her throat suddenly dry. "About Mr. Tanaka. About the deal." Marcus Vance stared at her for a long moment. Then, a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. It didn't reach his eyes. He lowered his phone. "You," he said, his voice dripping with mock wonder. "You have information. Let me guess, did you find the secret to the deal in a dustbin? Maybe you read it in the toilet water." A pair of junior executives, drawn by the confrontation, hovered nearby, smirking. The hallway, once a neutral space, had become an arena. Ilara felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. "It's about a garden," she managed to say, clutching the handle of her cart like a life raft. He left a note. "I can read Japanese. It's about what you plan to do to the land." Marcus took a step closer, invading her personal space. He leaned down, his expensive cologne a nauseating wave. "Listen to me very carefully," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "You are a cleaner. You scrub toilets. You are paid to be invisible and silent. You are not paid to think. You are certainly not paid to have information. Do you understand me?" She couldn't speak. She just nodded, her eyes fixed on a smudge on the marble floor. "We have $100,000 a year translator, Ivy League lawyers, and the best M&A team in the city working on this," he continued, his voice rising slightly, playing to his small audience. "And you, with your mop and your bucket, think you've cracked it. Did you get your degree in international relations from the back of a cereal box?" The junior executive snickered. The humiliation was complete. It was a public execution of her courage. "Now get your cart out of my way before I have you fired," Marcus snarled. "Go back to your little basement room and stick to what you know. Which is nothing." He straightened up, adjusted his tie, and strode past her without a backward glance. The junior executives followed in his wake, like pilot fish trailing a shark. Ilara stood frozen in the hallway. The silence they left behind was louder than the laughter. She felt 1,000 eyes on her, even though the hall was now empty. Her face burned. Her hands were trembling. The small, brave flame of hope she had nurtured all morning had been extinguished, doused with the cold water of his scorn. He was right. She was a cleaner. A nobody. What had she been thinking? She grabbed her cart and fled. She didn't walk. She ran, her squeaking shoes a frantic, shameful rhythm on the polished floor. She didn't stop until she was back in the service elevator, jabbing the button for the basement. As the doors slid shut, sealing her in the small metal box, she leaned her head against the cool wall and closed her eyes. The shame was a physical thing, a bitter taste in her mouth. She had tried. She had risked the one thing she had, her invisibility, and she had been crushed. She retreated. Hurt. Humiliated. Reinforced in the belief that had kept her safe for so long, the world of men like Julian Thorne and Marcus Vance was not for her. Speaking up was not just futile. It was dangerous. She was a ghost, and ghosts were meant to stay silent. The basement was her sanctuary and her prison. Down here, the rules were simple. Work hard, stay quiet, go home. No one laughed at you in the basement. No one expected anything from you. The air was thick with the familiar, honest smells of labor, a world away from the perfumed poison of the penthouse. She hid in the break room, her shift technically over but her body unwilling to carry her out of the building and back into the world. She sank onto the cracked vinyl chair, the scene with Marcus Vance playing over and over in her mind. His sneer. The laughter of the other men. The feeling of being small, insignificant, and utterly foolish. Each replay was another twist of the knife. He didn't just dismiss her. He enjoyed it. He had used her to perform his own power and frustration in front of his subordinates. She wasn't a person he had insulted, she was a prop he had used. She pulled the crumpled note from her pocket. The soul of the garden is not for sale. It seemed like a joke now. A piece of pretentious nonsense she had mistaken for a clue. What was she thinking? That she, Ilara, who struggled to pay her phone bill, could understand the minds of billionaires. She was about to throw the paper away, to crumple it up and toss it in the bin with the coffee grounds and sandwich wrappers, to get rid of the last piece of her foolishness. That was when she heard it. Through the thin walls of the break room, she could hear the chatter of the valet dispatch. A voice, tinny and distorted through a walkie-talkie, crackled with urgency. Tanaka's convoy is mobilizing. ETA for airport departure is 15 minutes. Thorne wants eyes on him until the wheels are up. Repeat, wheels up. 15 minutes. The words cut through her haze of shame. In 15 minutes, Kenji Tanaka's jet would be taxiing down the runway. In 30, it would be a silver speck in the sky, a disappearing symbol of a colossal failure. The deal wouldn't just be dead, it would be buried. And with it, any chance, however slim, of her ever getting the money for Leo's surgery. And then, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place, something she had seen but not processed. When she was cleaning the executive garage that morning, she had noticed the cars being prepared for Mr. Tanaka's delegation. Standard black town cars. But she had also seen a separate car, a discreet sedan, being prepped for one of Mr. Tanaka's aides. On the passenger seat was a small, lacquered wooden box. A shikibako. It was used for carrying important documents, but also, traditionally, for carrying items for ritual purification. At the time, she'd thought nothing of it. Now, it hit her with the force of a physical blow. They weren't just leaving. They were performing a ritual of cleansing. They were symbolically washing the stain of the insult away. This wasn't business. This was spiritual. The insult wasn't just to Mr. Tanaka's honor, but to the honor of his ancestors, to the very spirit of the land he held sacred. Forgetting to build a garden was a mistake. Planning to pave it over was an insult. But doing so unknowingly, with the smiling, ignorant barbarism of a glossy presentation, that was a curse. Tanaka wasn't just walking away, he was fleeing a spiritually contaminated site. Panic. Cold and sharp. This was bigger than a deal. In the world of men like Tanaka, where business and honor were inextricably linked, an insult of this magnitude could have repercussions for years. It could blacklist Thorne's entire company from future ventures in Japan. It would be a story told in quiet rooms, a cautionary tale of the arrogant American who tried to buy a soul and pave a temple. She stood up, her indecision evaporating, replaced by a terrifying, absolute certainty. She had to tell him. Not Marcus Vance. Not some assistant. She had to tell Julian Thorne himself. The thought was insane. It was a career suicide mission. But the alternative, doing nothing, letting that plane take off, letting Leo's future fade with it, was unthinkable. The shame of Marcus Vance's scorn was a hot coal in her gut. But the shame of her own inaction would be a cancer. As she stepped out of the break room, her mind made up, she almost collided with Mrs. Albright. The older woman took one look at Ilara's face and knew. "They're leaving," Ilara said, her voice tight. "It's worse than they think. It's about honor. It's about the ancestors." Mrs. Albright didn't question her. She didn't ask for explanations. She saw the terrified resolve in Ilara's eyes, the same look she'd seen in soldiers and surgeons on television. "That man upstairs," Mrs. Albright said, her voice a low, steady anchor in Ilara's storm. "He's surrounded by echoes. Men who tell him what he wants to hear. He needs to hear the truth, child. Just once. He needs to hear it from someone who isn't afraid of him." "I am afraid," Ilara whispered, and it was the truest thing she had ever said. "I'm terrified." "Good," Mrs. Albright said, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "It means you understand the stakes. Now, you have an access card that gets you to the service corridors on every floor. The penthouse service elevator opens into the kitchen pantry. His office is just beyond. Go. Don't let them see you. Don't let them stop you." It wasn't just encouragement. It was a plan. A blueprint for insurrection. Ilara nodded, a single, sharp motion. The decision was made. The die was cast. She was no longer a cleaner retreating to the basement. She was a messenger on a critical mission. She turned and walked, not ran, towards the service elevator. Her steps were steady. Her squeaking shoes were silent on the concrete floor. She was still invisible. But this time, she would use it as a weapon. This time, her invisibility would be her key. The journey from the basement to the penthouse was about to begin. It was a journey of 80 floors, and 1,000,000 miles. The service elevator was a rattling metal cage, a stark contrast to the wood-paneled, softly lit passenger elevators of Thorn Tower. It smelled of grease and ozone. As it ascended, Ilara felt the pressure change in her ears, a physical manifestation of her own audacious climb. Each number that lit up on the panel was a floor, a level of power and wealth she was bypassing. 10. 20. The floors for the junior accountants and marketing teams. 40. 50. The realm of the vice presidents and legal departments. 70. 75. The rarefied air of the senior executives. And then, 80. The penthouse. The doors opened not with a gentle chime, but with a jarring clang. As Mrs. Albright had said, she was in the pantry. It was a space of stainless steel and pristine, organized efficiency. Jars of imported olives, sacks of artisanal flour, bottles of water from volcanic springs. The quiet, humming heart of a lifestyle she couldn't fathom. She could hear his voice from the other room. Julian Thorne's voice. It was low, defeated. All the fire from the morning was gone, replaced by the cold ash of resignation. Just draft the statement," he was saying, presumably into a phone. "Express our regret. Standard boilerplate. No, don't mention the specifics. There are no specifics. The deal is dead. That's all." He was giving up. Ilara pushed the pantry door open. It swung silently on well-oiled hinges. The office was vast. The city skyline was a breathtaking, diamond-dusted backdrop. Julian Thorne stood with his back to her, phone to his ear, staring out at the empire he had built, a king surveying a kingdom where his power had suddenly found its limit. She took a step into the room. Her worn shoes made no sound on the thick, luxurious rug. For a moment, she was a ghost again, an observer. She could still turn back. Flee back to the safety of the elevator, the basement, her own small life. She thought of Leo. She thought of the mocking smile on Marcus Vance's face. "Stop," she said. The word was quiet, but in the tomb-like silence of the room, it was a gunshot. Julian Thorne froze. He didn't turn around at first. He simply went still, as if a predator had entered the room and any sudden movement would be fatal. He slowly lowered his phone. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice tight with surprise and suspicion. He turned. And he saw her. Standing in the middle of his multi-million-dollar office, framed by the skyline, was the cleaning lady. A small, slight figure in a cheap sweater and worn jeans, her face pale but her eyes burning with an intensity that defied her station. He didn't recognize her, not really. He had probably seen her 100 times, a fleeting gray shape in the periphery of his vision. Now, for the first time, he was truly looking at her. And he saw not a cleaner, but an enigma. How had she gotten in here? What did she want? "You need to get security out of here," he said into his phone, his voice hard again, a command. Now, he hung up and fixed his gaze on her. "You have 10 seconds to explain who you are and why you're not in handcuffs before I make a call that will ensure you not only never work in this city again, but you have trouble finding a job as a..." He trailed off, looking for the right insult, the right expression of her lowly status. She didn't flinch. She met his gaze. "There's no time," she said, her voice stronger now, clearer. The whisper was gone. "His plane is leaving. You're drafting a press release. You should be drafting an apology." A flicker of something, annoyance, curiosity, perhaps both, crossed his face. An apology for what? For offering him the best deal of his life. And then, she delivered the line. The 12 words that would change everything. The 12 words she had rehearsed on the long ride up from the basement. "Sir, the apology is not about the money. It is about the garden." The words hung in the air between them. Simple. Direct. And to Julian Thorne, utterly nonsensical. "The garden," he repeated, a frown creasing his brow. "What are you talking about? There is no garden." "There is," Ilara said, taking another step forward. She was no longer afraid. She was in her element now. This was a language she understood. The language of hidden meanings and overlooked details. "On the renderings for the golf course extension, there's a patch of land marked for clearing. You think it's just overgrown wilderness. It's not. It is a 17th century Karasansui, a historically priceless Zen garden known as Ryujin's Rest. It is a place of spiritual significance to his family, to his culture." She spoke with a calm, clear authority that was breathtaking. The cleaner had vanished. In her place was an expert, a scholar. "Mr. Tanaka didn't see a business proposal," she continued, her voice ringing with the clarity of her conviction. "He saw a plan for desecration. He saw men who were so blind by money that they were going to bulldoze a cathedral to extend a fairway. The insult was not that you offered him too little money. The insult was that you believed his soul, and the soul of his ancestors, was for sale at any price." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, crumpled piece of paper. She walked to the massive desk and placed it gently on the polished surface, next to a stack of useless financial reports. "He wrote this in the meeting, right before he left." Julian stared at the kanji, the elegant, incomprehensible script. Then he looked back at her. The anger was gone from his eyes. The frustration was gone. In their place was a look of dawning, horrified understanding. The kind of look a man has when he realizes he has been sleepwalking towards the edge of a cliff. His highly paid consultants, his Ivy League lawyers, his shark-like negotiators, they had all been looking at the spreadsheet. She had looked at the soul. Silence. A new kind of silence. Not the tense, predatory silence from before, but a stunned, profound silence. The sound of a world shifting on its axis. The sound of a paradigm shattering. Julian Thorne, the man who commanded markets and built empires, was rendered completely, utterly speechless by the quiet cleaning woman who had seen the one thing that mattered. He stared at her, this impossible person, and for the first time in a very long time, he didn't have an answer. He didn't have a plan. He could only listen. Julian Thorne sank into his leather chair. It was not a movement of relaxation, but of collapse, the motion of a man whose foundations had been pulverized. He looked at Ilara, truly looked at her, and saw not the uniform she usually wore, but the fierce intelligence in her eyes. He saw the quiet dignity that had carried her across the vast social and economic chasm between the basement and his penthouse. "A garden," he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "An $800 million deal, and it came down to a garden." He ran a hand over his face, the exhaustion of the last 24 hours finally catching up to him. "My team, my multi-million-dollar team, they surveyed every financial risk, every legal loophole, every market fluctuation. And they missed a damn garden. They didn't see it as a garden, Ilara corrected gently. They saw it as unused land. An asset to be developed. They don't speak the language of what is sacred. Only of what is profitable. He looked at the piece of paper on his desk, the elegant kanji, a silent accusation. Then he looked at her. And you do? I read, she said simply. I listen. I clean up what people leave behind. Sometimes, what they leave behind is more honest than what they say. The intercom on his desk buzzed, a jarring intrusion. Mr. Thorne. Security is here. You asked. Tell them to stand down, Julian snapped, his voice sharp with newfound purpose. And get Marcus Vance up here. Now. He cut the connection and looked back at Ilara. A new energy was coursing through him. The fog of defeat had lifted, replaced by the adrenaline of a last-ditch, impossible fight. Tanaka's plane. Has it left? 15 minutes from when I heard the call. So, maybe 5 minutes ago. He grabbed his phone. His fingers flew across the screen, not to his lawyers or his executives, but to his pilot. He typed a short, cryptic message. Hold my jet on the tarmac. Block Tanaka's runway if you have to. I'll pay the fines. He didn't wait for a reply. He opened another app, a secure line to his contact at the airport authority. He was moving again, the predator back on the hunt, but this time his focus was entirely different. The door to the office burst open and Marcus Vance strode in, his face a mask of self-importance. Julian, security said, what is she doing here? He spat, his eyes landing on Ilara with undisguised venom. I told you I would handle this. I was just about to have her removed from the building. Julian rose slowly from his chair. He walked around his desk until he was standing between Marcus and Ilara. He was taller than his subordinate, a fact he now used to its full, intimidating effect. You spoke to her earlier, Marcus. Julian's voice was arctic. She was babbling nonsense, Marcus said dismissively. Wasting my time. I sent her packing, he smirked at Ilara. As I should have. She told you it was about a garden, Julian stated. A garden, a poem, who knows what, Marcus waved a hand. The delusions of an overimagination. She needs to be fired. Oh, someone is getting fired, Julian said, his voice a low growl. She came to you with the key. The key to this entire disaster. And you mocked her. You humiliated her. You threw away an $800 million deal because you couldn't bear to listen to a cleaner for 30 seconds. Your arrogance, your utter, pig-headed stupidity, just cost this company more than you will ever be worth. The color drained from Marcus's face. Julian, that's not fair. How was I supposed to know? You weren't. Julian roared, the sound echoing off the glass. Your job was to listen. To bring information to me. But you were too busy protecting your own fragile ego to do your damn job. You saw a uniform, not a person. And in doing so, you made the single biggest mistake of your career. He pointed a trembling finger towards the door. Get out. Clear your desk. Your access is revoked. You have 30 minutes to be out of this building. If I ever see your face again, it will be in court. Marcus stood, stunned, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The reversal was too swift, too absolute. He looked from Julian's implacable fury to Ilara's quiet composure. He had been beaten. Not by a competitor, not by a market downturn, but by the cleaning lady. The humiliation was so total, so profound, it broke him. He turned without another word and stumbled out of the office, a man who had just watched his entire world implode. Julian watched him go, his breathing heavy. He turned back to Ilara. The anger was gone, replaced by a weary, profound respect. I need to make a call, he said. To Tanaka. I need to apologize, he gestured to the phone. What do I say? I don't speak the language. No, Ilara said. You don't. But I do. The moment stretched. He understood. He wasn't just asking for advice. He was asking for her to be his voice. He made one more call first, to the front desk. Send a check from my personal account up to my office. Make it for $5 million. He listened for a moment. I don't care about the logistics. Just do it. He hung up and looked at her. That's for you. A finder's fee. Ilara stared at him. $5 million. The number was meaningless. It was too big, a figure from a movie. It didn't solve her problem. It obliterated it, and 1,000 other problems she didn't even have. A quiet knock at the door, and a nervous assistant brought in the check. Julian signed it and slid it across the desk to her. Ilara looked at the piece of paper. Then she looked at him. She pushed it back. No, thank you, she said softly. Julian was stunned. No. Everyone has a price. I just offered you yours. My brother needs an operation, she said, her voice steady. It costs $2,000. The medication he needs is $350 a month. My back rent is $800. I need $3,150. She paused. And I need a job. A real one. Where people listen. Julian Thorne stared at her, and for the second time in an hour, he was completely floored. She had him over a barrel. She held the fate of his biggest deal in her hands. She could have asked for millions. She could have asked for a percentage. Instead, she asked for the exact amount she needed. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement of character. It was the most powerful move he had ever witnessed. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. He tore up the $5 million check. You're hired, he said. Director of Cultural Relations. Salary, will start at $300,000 a year. Plus bonus. And we'll take care of your brother's medical bills. All of them. For as long as it takes. He held out his hand. Do we have a deal? Ilara looked at his outstretched hand. The hand that built this tower. The hand that signed deals that could change the fate of cities. She thought of her own hands, chapped and raw from bleach. She didn't shake it. Not yet. First, she said, we save your deal. She picked up the phone on his desk. Get Mr. Tanaka on the line. Tell him Julian Thorne has a message for him. A personal 1-inch. 1 year later, the Thorne Golden Sands Okinawa Resort was celebrating its grand opening. It was a staggering success, lauded not for its luxury, but for its sensitivity. The grand lobby featured art from local Okinawan masters. The restaurant served menus designed in consultation with village elders. The staff was hired almost exclusively from the surrounding community. And the golf course was smaller. At the heart of the property, where the fairway was supposed to be, was a garden. Ryugin's Rest had been restored to its 17th-century glory by a team of master gardeners from Kyoto, funded by a personal grant from Julian Thorne. It was not an attraction. There were no signs, no gift shop. It was simply there, a quiet, breathing space of raked sand, ancient stones, and profound peace. It was the soul of the resort, and it was not for sale. Ilara stood on a balcony overlooking the garden, a glass of iced tea in her hand. She was not wearing a cleaner's uniform. She wore a simple, elegant linen dress and sandals. Her hair was no longer pulled back in a severe bun but fell softly around her shoulders. She looked rested. She looked happy. She was no longer invisible. As the Director of Cultural Relations for Thorne Industries, she was one of the most powerful women in the company. She had a staff, a budget, and Julian Thorne's complete, unshakable trust. Her job was to see what others missed, to listen to the whispers the executives ignored. She was the company's soul. Her brother, Leo, was healthy. The operation had been a success. He was enrolled in a top school, his future bright and limitless, all thanks to the woman he called his hero. Ilara had also set up a foundation, funded by her first year's bonus, that provided scholarships for language students from low-income families. She called it the Albright Grant, in honor of the woman who had given her a plan. The door to the balcony slid open and Julian Thorne stepped out. He looked different, too. The hard, predatory edge was gone, replaced by a warmth she had put there. He was still a titan of industry, but he was a man who had learned the value of things that could not be priced. He came to stand beside her, not as a boss to an employee, but as a partner. Their relationship had evolved over the past year, from a professional alliance into a deep, abiding friendship that was slowly, carefully, blossoming into something more. "Mr. Tanaka is very pleased," he said, his voice a low murmur. "He says the garden has never felt more at peace." "It's not our garden," Ilara reminded him gently. "We're just its caretakers." "A lesson that cost me $800 million to learn," he said with a wry smile. "Best money I ever spent." He looked at her, his eyes full of an emotion that still made her heart beat a little faster. "I was thinking about what you said. About needing a job where people listen. I hope this is it." "Some days," she teased, "you're still a little hard of hearing." He laughed, a real, genuine laugh. It was a sound she loved. "I'm working on it," he said. "I have a good teacher." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the East China Sea, the last rays of light glinting off the ancient stones in the garden below. It was a world away from the penthouse and the basement, a new world they had built together. Later that night, in her suite, Ilara opened her travel bag. Tucked away in a side pocket, wrapped in silk, was a small, plastic card. It was her old cleaning staff ID from Thorn Tower. The photo was of a tired-looking young woman with haunted eyes and her hair pulled back tightly. The name read, Ilara Vance. No, that was Marcus's name. Let's fix it. The name read, Ilara Santos. Her job title, custodial technician. She held it in her hand, the worn plastic cool against her skin. It was a memento. A reminder. Not of the poverty or the struggle, but of the woman who had been brave enough to walk out of the basement and into the light. The woman who had learned that sometimes, the most powerful voice in the world is the one that no one is listening to. And that the biggest mistake anyone can make is believing the people who tell you that you are invisible. She had been a ghost, but she had learned to speak, and in doing so, had taught an empire a new language. She smiled, put the card away, and went to join Julian on the balcony, ready for whatever came next.